My name is Claire, I am 34 years old, and I am a lawyer in Paris. My life might seem perfect from the outside, a successful career, a sumptuous apartment in the Marais, and Marc, my husband, a talented chef and owner of a Michelin-starred restaurant. Yet behind this facade of happiness, something is missing. Our daily life is dictated by Marc's demanding hours, often absent even on the nights I come home late from the office. Intimate dinners have become rare, replaced by reheated dishes that I eat alone, accompanied by my melancholic thoughts. Marc is passionate about his work, a quality I admire in him, but this passion has created a gap between us. There are days when I wonder if we share anything more than our address. This emotional distance weighs on me. We have tried to discuss the situation, but each conversation seems to go in circles, often ending with apologies from both sides without anything really changing. I feel lonely, and loneliness can be an insidious trap. It was during one of these solitary evenings that everything changed. It was a Saturday night, and we were invited to Marc's parents' house for a family dinner. The whole family was there, including Thomas, Marc's younger brother. Thomas and I have always gotten along well. He is the opposite of Marc, relaxed, charming, and always ready to make people laugh. That night, he seemed even more charming than usual. Maybe I was more vulnerable, or maybe something about him attracted me in a way I had never felt before. The dinner went as usual, but I couldn't help but notice the furtive glances Thomas was giving me. I felt a strange warmth each time our eyes met. After the meal, we found ourselves alone on the terrace, away from the others. The conversation was light, but there was a palpable tension, an electricity in the air that could not be ignored. "You seem worried, Claire," he said, his eyes searching for mine in the darkness. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided to confide in him. After all, he was Marc's brother, and maybe he could help me understand what I was feeling. "It's complicated, Thomas," I replied. "Marc and we're going through a difficult time. He is so caught up in his work that I feel like I don't matter to him anymore." Thomas nodded, visibly attentive. "I understand," he said softly. "Marc has always been passionate about his cooking, but that shouldn't make you feel less important." Those simple yet comforting words had a profound effect on me. For the first time in a long time, I felt understood and listened to. We continued to talk, sharing our frustrations and hopes. At some point, without really knowing how, our hands brushed against each other. This simple contact sent a shockwave through my body, awakening feelings I thought were extinct. That night, when I got home, thoughts of Thomas wouldn't leave my mind. Marc was still up, engrossed in reading a cookbook. I slipped silently into the bedroom, trying to sort out my emotions. How had I let this happen? Yet a part of me couldn't deny the excitement that this encounter had awakened. In the following days, I found myself looking forward to our next family gatherings with a new impatience. Each meeting with Thomas became an escape, a stolen moment from the monotony of my married life. Gradually, our complicity turned into something deeper, more intense. We exchanged messages, knowing looks, discreet touches full of promises. Deep down, I knew this path was dangerous, that I was playing with fire. But the attention and affection I received from Thomas were like a drug I couldn't give up. I felt alive, rediscovering forgotten sensations. And so, despite the warnings of my conscience, I let myself be drawn into a spiral of emotions and desire. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I spent long moments thinking about our exchanges, reliving each smile, each glance from Thomas. The feeling of guilt was there, of course, but it was overshadowed by the burgeoning passion that consumed me. Family gatherings became precious occasions where every moment spent with Thomas was a treasure to cherish. One evening, Marc had to work late at the restaurant, and I had decided to relax by going out for a drink with friends. In reality, it was an excuse to see Thomas. We had arranged to meet in a small discreet bar in Montmartre, away from prying eyes. As I entered the bar, my heart was pounding. Thomas was already there, sitting at a table in a dark corner. He greeted me with a smile that melted all my reservations. "Claire, you look lovely tonight," he said, standing up to kiss me on the cheek. The touch of his lips on my skin made me shiver. We ordered glasses of wine and began to talk about everything and nothing, but there was an underlying tension that could not be ignored. As the glasses emptied, our conversations became more personal, more intimate. Thomas talked about his frustrations, his dreams, his hopes. I did the same, opening up in a way I hadn't in a long time. The alcohol helped, and the barriers gradually crumbled. At some point, our hands intertwined on the table, and without thinking, I gave in to the impulse that had been burning inside me for weeks. Our lips met in a passionate, desperate kiss. That first kiss was a trigger. After that night, it was impossible to go back. We began to see each other secretly, seizing every stolen moment to be together. I lived in a constant duality, torn between my role as a married woman and that of a secret lover. Each meeting with Thomas was a mixture of guilt and pleasure, an intoxicating cocktail that made me addicted. Our rendezvous became bolder. One afternoon, while Marc was away for a culinary event, Thomas and I decided to meet at his place. The excitement and fear of getting caught added a new dimension to our relationship. As soon as I stepped through his door, he pulled me to him, and we surrendered to our passion, forgetting the outside world. Between embraces, we talked about our lives, our dreams. Thomas listened to me with an attention I hadn't felt in a long time. He made me feel alive, desired. But this affair had a price. Each return to reality was harder, each lie to Marc weighed a little more on me. I knew what I was doing was wrong, that I was betraying the trust of a man who loved me. Yet I couldn't stop. Thomas had become my refuge, my breath of fresh air. Things took an even riskier turn during a family weekend. We were all gathered at Marc's parents' house to celebrate his father's birthday. The atmosphere was festive, but I couldn't help but look for Thomas. Every moment spent near him was a sweet torture. At some point, I slipped out into the garden to get some air. Thomas joined me shortly after, under the pretext of a cigarette break. "You drive me crazy, Claire," he murmured as he approached me. "I can't stand these secrets anymore. I need you." His words resonated within me, awakening conflicting feelings. Before I could respond, he pulled me against him, and we kissed with an intensity that took my breath away. It was then that everything went wrong. A young cousin, curious to know what we were doing, quietly came out and saw our exchange. The shock in his eyes was evident, and I knew the secret wouldn't last long. In the days that followed, I lived in fear that our secret would be discovered. Every time my phone rang or someone knocked on the door, my heart skipped a beat. The young cousin, Pierre, was only 10 years old, but his look had been too eloquent. I dreaded the moment he would speak, when our affair would be revealed. Thomas, on his side, tried to reassure me. "Pierre won't say anything," he kept telling me, but I saw the worry in his eyes. We continued to see each other, but the carefree nature had disappeared, replaced by constant anxiety. We knew we were playing with fire, and each passing day seemed to bring us closer to disaster. Then came the day when the inevitable happened. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Marc and I were invited to lunch at his parents' house. The atmosphere was tense, and I felt like a criminal awaiting her verdict. In the middle of the meal, Pierre, sitting across from me, kept giving me nervous glances. His behavior did not escape his mother's vigilant eye, who eventually asked him what was wrong. "Nothing, Mom," he replied, but his voice trembled. "Pierre, tell the truth," insisted his mother. It was then that he dropped the bombshell. "I saw Claire and Thomas kissing in the garden the other day," he said in a weak voice. The silence that followed his declaration was deafening. All eyes turned to me, then to Thomas. Marc, sitting next to me, turned pale. "Claire, is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. I couldn't lie. "Yes, Marc. It's true," I admitted, feeling the tears rise. "The rest is a blur in my memory." Marc abruptly stood up and left the house without a word. The family was in shock, and Marc's parents tried to understand what had happened, but I didn't have the strength to explain. Thomas stayed by my side, but I could see the guilt and sadness in his eyes. The drive back to our apartment was silent. Marc didn't say a word, his hands clenched on the steering wheel. Once home, he packed a few things and left, leaving me alone with my guilt. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Marc didn't answer my calls, and I knew our marriage was falling apart. Thomas tried to support me, But I felt that our relationship had lost its magic, replaced by pain and regret. A week later, Marc filed for divorce. We met one last time in a cafe to discuss the details. "I can't forgive you, Claire," he said, his eyes filled with sadness. "I loved you, but you betrayed me in the worst way." His words were like a dagger. I tried to explain, to tell him how much I regretted it, but it was no use. Marc was determined to move on. That day, I realized I had lost the man I loved because of my own weaknesses. Thomas, despite everything, stayed close to me. He confessed that he had genuine feelings for me, but it only added to my confusion. I was torn between my guilt towards Marc and the feelings I had for Thomas. Every day was an internal struggle, a battle between what I felt and what I knew was right. Finally, I decided to take a step back. I took a few weeks off from work and went away alone, far from Paris, to think. I needed to understand what I really wanted, to take stock of my life. This period of solitude allowed me to see things from a different perspective. I realized how much I had hurt Marc, how much I had disappointed my own family and Marc's. I also understood that despite everything, I had deep feelings for Thomas, but that our relationship was based on betrayal. Upon returning to Paris, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I met Thomas and explained that we had to part ways. "I love you, Thomas," I told him, tears in my eyes, "but we can't continue like this. We have caused too much pain around us." He tried to convince me to stay, but I was determined. We parted on good terms, but with heavy hearts. The separation from Thomas was devastating. Every corner of Paris reminded me of moments shared with him. But I knew it was necessary. Marc had moved out, and I regularly received documents related to our divorce. Each envelope was a brutal reminder of the life I had destroyed. At work, I tried to maintain a professional facade, but my colleagues noticed my change in mood. One day, my friend and colleague Sophie took me aside. "Claire, you look exhausted. What's going on?" I hesitated, but eventually decided to confide a part of the truth. "Marc and I are over," I said, my voice trembling. "And there's someone else, or rather there was." Sophie listened in silence, then took my hand. "You know, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do afterwards. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional." Her words resonated with me. I decided to see a therapist to help me through this difficult time. The sessions were challenging, but they helped me understand my motivations, accept my mistakes, and look at the future from a different angle. Meanwhile, the situation with Marc became increasingly complicated. We had shared assets to divide, and each meeting with the lawyers was a trial. Marc was distant, almost cold, and I knew it was his way of protecting himself. One day, as we were leaving the lawyer's office, I tried one last time to talk to him. "Marc, I'm sorry for everything," I began, tears in my eyes. "I know I ruined everything, but I wanted you to know that I sincerely regret it." He looked at me for a moment, his eyes reflecting deep pain. "Claire, it's too late for apologies. We need to move on each on our own." His words were like a punch. I realized that despite my regrets, some things couldn't be fixed. The guilt was eating away at me, but I had to learn to live with it. My therapist helped me understand that I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to act in the future. A few months passed, and little by little, I started to rebuild my life. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, took up activities I loved again. The pain was still there, but it became more bearable. Marc and I finalized our divorce, and he left Paris to open a new restaurant in the provinces. I sincerely wished him success, even though our story was over. One day, as I was flipping through photo albums, I came across pictures of our wedding. Memories flooded back, overwhelming me with emotions. It was another life, another time. I realized then that I still had a long way to go to find inner peace. It was at that moment that Thomas contacted me again. He wanted to see me, to talk about what had happened. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed. We met in a cafe, like at the beginning of our relationship. Thomas had changed. He seemed more mature, more thoughtful. "Claire, I'm sorry for everything we went through," he said sincerely. "I still love you, but I understand if you want to move on." His words rekindled feelings in me, but I was determined not to make the same mistakes again. Thomas, I need time for myself, I replied softly. We hurt a lot of people, and I need to find out who I am before I can consider something new. He accepted my decision with newfound maturity. We stayed in touch, but our relationship evolved. We were no longer secret lovers but friends who supported each other in their quest for redemption. With time, life went on. I found a new balance, a new serenity. The pain of betrayal slowly faded, replaced by a determination not to repeat past mistakes. I learned to forgive myself, to accept that I am human, with my weaknesses and strengths. A year after the separation from Marc, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet a part of me remained marked by that period of my life. I focused on my work, my friends, and my therapy, seeking to learn from my past mistakes. Thomas and I had maintained a friendly relationship, but it was clear to both of us that we couldn't go back. One evening, as I was coming home after a long day at the office, I received an unexpected call. It was Marc. My heart skipped a beat seeing his name on the screen. I hadn't heard his voice in months and feared what he might have to say. Claire, it's Marc. I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at the cafe we used to go to? His voice was tense, and I could feel there was something important behind this call. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes before him, my mind racing. When Marc walked in, he looked tired but determined. We sat at a table in a corner, away from the other customers. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with memories and unspoken words. Claire, I wanted to see you because I've thought about everything that happened, he began, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. Our relationship, our breakup, and what it means to me. I waited in silence, sensing that what he was going to say was crucial. I realized that despite the pain and betrayal, I had a part of responsibility in what happened, he continued. I was too invested in my work, I neglected our relationship. I'm not saying what you did was justified, but I understand now what might have pushed you to seek elsewhere what you no longer found with me. His words were a balm on my wounds. I felt tears welling up but held them back. Thank you, Marc, I murmured. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I think we both need to move on, to really start a new life. I wanted to tell you that I forgive you and wish you happiness. These simple yet powerful words freed me from an immense burden. We spent a little more time talking, reminiscing about good and bad memories, saying goodbye in a way we hadn't been able to before. Leaving the cafe, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of a painful chapter but also the beginning of a new page. A few weeks later, I received an offer from a major law firm in New York. It was an opportunity one couldn't refuse. I decided to leave behind the memories and mistakes, to start a new life in a new city. Before leaving, I saw Thomas one last time. We met at the same cafe where Marc and I had said our goodbyes. Thomas seemed happy for me, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. I'll miss you, he said with a sad smile. You too, I replied. But I think this is what's best for both of us. We kissed one last time, a tender and regretful goodbye kiss. Then I left without looking back, determined to start this new chapter of my life with courage and hope. My arrival in New York was both exciting and intimidating. The city was vast, full of possibilities and challenges. I threw myself into my work with renewed energy, determined to prove my worth and build a new life. Months passed, and little by little, I found my place in this new city. I met new people, made friends, and began to explore what life had to offer. I learned to forgive myself, to accept my past, and to move forward with determination. One day, while walking through Central Park, I received an unexpected message from Marc. I just wanted to let you know that I opened my restaurant. It's called New Life. If you're ever in the area, you're always welcome. I smiled as I read those words. It was a sign that we had both found a way to turn the page, to start a new life. I put my phone away and continued walking, feeling lighter than ever. The time in New York transformed me, in unexpected ways. Far from Paris, far from my past mistakes, I found a new perspective on my life. I learned to forgive myself, to accept my weaknesses, and to focus on my future. My work at the law firm was demanding, but it allowed me to flourish professionally and rediscover my passion for justice. Away from the dramas and regrets, I began attending support groups for people who had gone through similar experiences. These meetings helped me understand that I was not alone, that others had also made mistakes and were seeking to rebuild themselves. The shared stories offered me new perspectives and a sense of community. One day, during one of these meetings, I met a man named Daniel. He was a photographer, recently settled in New York after a painful breakup. Our stories had surprising resonances, and we quickly formed a sincere friendship. Daniel taught me to see the world from a new angle, through the lens of his camera. We spent hours exploring the city, capturing fleeting moments and everyday scenes. Over time, our friendship turned into something deeper. Daniel was patient, understanding, and showed me that love could be reborn even after the worst trials. We took our time, building our relationship on solid foundations without rushing. One evening, as we watched the sunset together from the Brooklyn Bridge, Daniel took my hand and looked me straight in the eyes. "Claire, you have shown me that it is possible to rebuild a life after the worst storms. I love you, and I want to build a future with you." His words touched a sensitive chord in me. I realized that despite everything, I had found someone who accepted me with my flaws and strengths. "I love you too, Daniel," I replied, moved. "Let's build this future together." Our relationship blossomed, and over time, I felt that I could finally turn the page on my past. The memories of Marc and Thomas were still there, but they were part of another life, another time. I had learned from my mistakes, and those lessons had made me stronger, more resilient. Marc and I stayed in episodic contact. He sent me photos of his thriving restaurant. New life had become a symbol of rebirth, not only for him but also for me. I learned that Thomas had found someone special, and although it stung slightly, I was happy for him. We all deserved to find peace and happiness. One day, while walking the bustling streets of Manhattan, my phone rang. It was an invitation to a high school reunion in Paris. The idea of returning there, of seeing faces from the past, was both exciting and frightening. After discussing it with Daniel, we decided to go together. This trip would be an opportunity to show how much I had changed, how much I had evolved. Back in Paris, the memories flooded back. Every street corner, every cafe, every bridge was steeped in my history. I saw friends, former colleagues, and even Marc, who had come to the reunion. Our meeting was filled with nostalgia but also gratitude. We had both come a long way, and it showed. "I'm happy to see you happy, Claire," Marc said with a sincere smile. We both deserved this new start. The reunion ended on a positive note, and Daniel and I spent a few days exploring Paris, my hometown, with new eyes. It was a journey of reconciliation with my past but also a celebration of my present and future. Back in New York, I embraced this new life with immense gratitude. I had gone through trials, made mistakes, but I had also found the strength to get up and rebuild myself. My journey had taught me to appreciate every moment, to live fully. As I sat on a bench in Central Park, watching people pass by, I felt a deep inner peace. I was finally in harmony with myself, ready to welcome whatever the future held. My life was far from perfect, but it was authentic, rich with lessons and experiences. And that, ultimately, was what made it so beautiful.